Hi and welcome. I'm Steve Martirano, and this is the Behavioral Corner. You're invited to hang with us as we discuss the ways we live today, the choices we make, the things we do, and how they affect our health and well-being. So you're on the corner, the Behavioral Corner. Please hang around a while. Well, you know, like everything else, we're waiting. That's what we do nowadays. We wait for some light at the end of the tunnel. Right now, it's all about what can we open up and how can we open it up. And we're hanging here on the corner going, yeah, most of that conversation has to do with business, and that's understandable. Got to get the economy going. But there are a whole lot of other things that are looming on the horizon that we're all looking forward to. Sports is one of them. We've talked about this in the past. They play a big, big role in our emotional well-being. None more so than youth sports, and that's a whole nother kettle of fish. Seasons are looming. The fall's coming. Kids are wondering, we playing or are we not playing? So we thought we'd go to a guy who spent more Friday nights in high school athletic programs than, Gene Hackman. He only coached that one couple of years in Indiana. Phil Anastasia is our guest. Phil is a longtime resident of the area that we recorded this in, the Delaware Valley, born and bred, a journalist, a journalistic family, as a matter of fact. Phil gravitated towards sports early in his career, and I believe, and we'll find out, that he began at the newspaper of my youth. My first newspaper was the Camden County Courier-Post. I have a great affection for the paper, and their longtime sports columnist Phil Anastasia is our guest. Phil has now been for many years with the Philadelphia Inquirer in similar roles. Phil, thanks so much for joining us.
Oh, my pleasure, Steve.
You must be chafing at the bit as well to get back to your beat. I know that guys in your business now have had to start writing about anything they can write about while they wait for sports to come back. Tell us a little bit about your background. How did you wind up essentially covering youth sports?
Well, Steve, I actually got in the business because, as you mentioned, I'm from a family that includes another journalist. That's my older brother, George, who's a longtime organized crime writer, written several books, and a longtime reporter for the Philadelphia Inquirer. He's now retired, but he was involved in journalism, while I was still in school. So I, kind of had a firsthand look at what the business was like, saw what it was like for him. And so, I kind of gravitated towards this field. Like my brother, we were deeply involved with sports growing up. I mean, we played everything, not saying we were great athletes, but we played everything. And I was an English major in college. And so to me, it was kind of being able to put together two things that I really loved, which was reading and writing and sports. And so I kind of, leaned towards becoming more of a sports reporter than a traditional reporter, which my brother is. So that's how I got involved. I was lucky enough, like anything else, had good timing, got out of college just as the Courier-Post, had some opportunities there for cub reporters to get started. I got started there, and kind of away I went from there. Mm-hmm. Talking over 40 years now, but that's how it all started for me.
Yeah, hard to believe, right? 40 years?
No kidding. It's been a great ride, but it's been a little bumpy these last little bit here.
Yeah, for everybody. Now you have also covered the pros as well, right?
That's correct. When I started at the Courier-Post, I, like most cub reporters, I started out as a high school writer early on. Quickly transitioned to do a lot of college basketball. I did a ton of Philadelphia Big Five basketball all through the 80s. I did a lot of college basketball, and at the same time, in '83, I became an Eagles beat writer. So I did the Eagles as a beat man for 10 years, from 83 to 92. And then in 93, I became a general columnist, which basically means you write about everything in sports. So I did Eagles, Phillies, Flyers, Sixers, college sports, and high school sports at that time. And then actually had a little stint as the sports editor of the Courier-Post for 6 years before coming to the Inquirer in 2008. So my career, I spent 28 years at the Courier-Post, which was my hometown newspaper too, Steve, growing up. Mm-hmm. Read the Courier-Post. I spent 28 years there. and now I'm in my 13th year at the Philadelphia Inquirer.
One of the great suburban newspapers, in certainly anywhere, but certainly in this area. But when I'm a little older than you. I don't think I'm older than your brother, but who is? George is an old pal. But when I was growing up, covering youth sports in a paper like the Courier Post, which was ground central for suburban youth sports in our area, it was pretty much confined to maybe a paragraph, but most often just box scores. When did that all start to change and they started to look at youth sports as a for real beat? When, in your experience, when did that happen?
Yeah, I think it was a little bit before my time. When I got there in '80, and in the '70s, I think it expanded out a little bit. And then the whole time I was there, it just kept expanding out. We eventually created a product called Varsity, which was a Saturday-only standalone high school sports section that people just went crazy for. It was like 12 pages long, and just about every sport had its own page. So it kind of evolved, more and more as time went on, and I think the paper got a little bit more sophisticated. Mm-hmm. Readers got a little bit more demanding. That was I think a kind of a golden age of local coverage. What we've seen in the last 5 to 10 years as the newspaper industry, has suffered so many shocks economically and in terms of people migrating to the web and having different sources of their information, has been a real cutback in local sports coverage. And it's not nearly what it used to be. And it's sad. It's a shame for people who remember the old days. I mean, I'm at the Inquirer now, and just this past winter, we discontinued running like the basketball box scores for high school basketball. And as you can imagine, Steve, these old-time Philadelphia Catholic League people, they could not understand how they could get their Inquirer, and not see who scored for Bonner last night. How did Archbishop Wood do last night? Wait a minute, my grandson's friend plays for Newman Goretti. I can't see, what he did last night.
This rise in covering of youth sports is kind of a double-edged sword, it seems to me, that you say it predated you a bit. You started in the early 80s, and I think the rise in covering it more closely and in depth probably coincided with the rise of ESPN, 24-hour news cycles for sports, to the point where it's, even with the cutbacks you're talking about now, the media has elevated youth sports to, a practical equivalency with certainly college sports. I mean, there's a lot of youth sports. I'm thinking particularly of basketball, which can be viewed as a big-time deal in the journalistic world. I wonder if you've watched that and wondered it over the long haul. Was it good for kids to be taken that seriously as athletes at that young age? What do you think about that?
My general answer would be no. And again, that's a generalization. And certainly I'm not saying it damaged a majority of kids. I just think, generally speaking, I think some of the innocence of youth sports has been lost in it. It's actually big business now, and I'm not talking about high school now as much as I'm talking about independent youth sports. This is a $1 billion industry, all these travel teams and these different national tournaments they run, and the sort of the quest for college scholarships, which has driven youth sports, and the allure to every parent that your kid needs to sign up for this camp, go to this clinic, work out with this individual trainer, because that's going to increase his or her chances to get a college scholarship, is something that's really exploded, I think, in the last, I'd say 20 years or so.
Yeah.
And what you and I think a lot of people sort of romanticize in terms of youth sports being sort of more innocent, kids kind of playing in the sandlot, pickup games without parental involvement, without adult involvement, is really kind of a thing of the past. You really don't ride past a field, and I'm not talking about now during COVID, but I mean just in general, you rarely ride past a field and see a kid playing a pickup baseball game. Like like Sandlot, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
You don't see that anymore. It's all well, my son signed up for this 8 and under travel team, or he's on this, 10 and under,
Right.
this team or that team. It's just, it's different now. It's become much more organized, much more parent driven, much more adult driven. And, and not to paint with a broad brush, there are positive aspects to that. Kids are getting some good competition, good exposure. Most of those people are involved for the right reasons. Not all of them, but most of them, I think, are.
Yeah. Well,
So I don't mean to paint with a...
No, but it's really worth it, and it's right in our wheelhouse here because we want to talk about the way we behave and how our behavior affects our health, our mental health, our physical health. We know that activity is great for kids. What you've just described is largely parent-driven, and for understandable reasons. But on the kid side, I mean, some of the dangers are mitigated by the fact that, for the most part, at some point, and it happens earlier and earlier, you're talking about an elite kid who's on these travel teams. I mean, he or she are probably going to want that level of competition anyway. But it was parent-driven. It is now a big business, as you point out. There are enormous pressures put on families and children, and that all has a definite bearing on kids' psyches and the family. In fact, as a unit, the family's behavioral health is impacted by all of this pressure. So now we're going to pivot in a little bit towards how those pressures are now magnified enormously as we try to get these kids back on the field in the middle of a pandemic. But before we get to that, just a little more exploration of the whole idea of youth sports. So you've done the Eagles, you've done the pros, you've done big-time college basketball, but you did gravitate back towards, I guess it's your first love, and that's youth sports. And why? What's better about that than covering the Eagles, for instance?
Well, for me, it was a combination of things. I mean, like I said, I had done the pro stuff for a long time. Probably 20, 25 years of my career were involved in covering either big-time college or the Eagles or all the Philadelphia professional sports. I always said, I began my career covering high school sports. I wanted to end my career covering high school sports. I really love high school sports. I love the fact that, and again, this is a generalization, I love the fact that, you're still kind of representing your hometown. You're still kind of representing the school where your parents went, or your aunt and uncle went, or where your brother and sister went. You're still kind of representing the school that the guy that works in the grocery store or the mailman is going to come and watch you that day, and he went there also, or she went there also. And I love that aspect of it. I love the tradition of it that, Haddon Heights is always going to be wearing the garnet and gold, and Haddon Fields is always going to wear the red and the black, and there's fathers and grandfathers and great-grandfathers that represented this same school, and there's a tradition there. That really appeals to me. I think there's still a lot of innocence to it when you compare it to big-time college or professional sports. There is pressure, there's no question, but there's nothing like what you see at the next level. There's still a certain amount of innocence to it. The kids are great to deal with. The coaches, by and large, and I'm talking in overwhelming majority, are really good people involved for the right reasons, that really just want the kids to have a great experience and to reap the benefits of being part of a team and putting something bigger than yourself in front of it and sacrificing for your teammates and all. So all that just really appeals to me. Sure. and always has. And, it's one of the reasons I was so sad. Obviously we're talking big picture here. So sad to see, high school basketball end this year before it could really finish, and no spring sports for, just millions of seniors who didn't have their senior baseball season or senior lacrosse season or senior softball season. So I just really think it's a real integral part of school life and integral part of society. And it's why I'm hoping so badly, Steve, that it comes back.
Yeah,
Although,
there's a real price to pay. I mean, I don't suggest anything dramatic is going to happen, but you're right. A lot of kids have lost something significant that will have some sort of negative effect on their mental state going forward. Let's just stay with this area, the general area, before we get into the COVID stuff. Lots of the stories have been negative over the years about hazing rituals and all kinds of stuff that naturally gets gets itself in the newspapers and on television, but there's a whole lot about youth sports that I think we've forgotten about and taken for granted. My kids played, my son longer than my daughter, but I remember being most appreciative of the amount of time young athletes have to put into it at whatever skill level they're at. If they make a team, they have to make a commitment to time, and that's really important when somebody's young because, idle hands in the devil's workshop and all that. You see it that way? Let's talk a little bit about some of the values of playing youth sports.
Generally speaking, most coaches and most parents want their kids involved for, reasons other than we're going to win or we're going to earn a scholarship. We're going to learn some life lessons here. We're going to learn what it means to commit yourself to a larger group. We're going to learn what it means to sacrifice. We're going to learn the value of hard work, and I want to get better. How do I get better? Well, I don't get better by sitting home on the couch. I get better by exercising or trying this skill or working out. And the other thing, Stephen, I'm a big believer in this, is learning that you will fail. You will fail at times, and that's okay. And there are going to be people that are better than you at that particular skill or that particular sport, and that's okay too. There used to be a book like Everything I Needed to Learn, I learned in kindergarten. I say that about youth sport. I actually say it about wrestling, and some people think I'm crazy because they look at wrestling and are like, "Are you kidding me?" And I tell people, and this is just wrestling, but it really applies to all youth sports, I think. I tell people anything that you want a young boy to learn, he can learn in a wrestling room. Now, there is some, because of the nature of wrestling, there is some craziness around that ring. There are some crazy parents. There are some crazy coaches. There are some people that, because of the combative nature of the sport, tends to bring out maybe the worst angels of their nature. But if you have a coach and a parent who has a good handle on it, man, everything you want a young boy to learn, he can learn in a wrestling room in terms of self-discipline, and it's all on you, your responsibility. How hard you work is what you'll get back. And I think in a broader sense, that really does apply to every sport.
No, it does.
Wrestling is unique.
Yeah, wrestling is unique, and it's sort of a one-on-one kind of thing, but it is in the team context. But the other thing that it seems to me from a behavioral health standpoint that is irreplaceable for young people when they play organized sports is the ability to learn how to work in a group. I mean, we only have to look around now and see how tragically we are not able to get along during a monumental crisis, to see some of the failures here that are going on that should have been taught or were taught and forgotten in team sports. Team sports teaches you more than anything else that we're all in this together. We all succeed together or we all fail together. You don't learn that in algebra class. You don't. You learn something else, but you don't learn we're all in this together. I sometimes worry that that's being lost too.
That's a concern, and there's an atomization of our society. We seem to be splintered in so many different directions, and we look for institutions that can still hold us together. And, some people say that, religion used to be able to do that and can't quite do it to the extent and to the breadth that it used to, and community centers and different organizations, whether it's the Elks or the Moose or whoever they are, the Lions Club or whatever group used to be able to hold things together in different community organizations. School, I think, can still do that to a large extent. It creates a sort of a community network, and school sports in particular, youth sports in particular, can kind of create that sense of community and also,
absolutely,
as I mentioned, the sense of shared sacrifice and also the sense of responsibility to your teammate. I mean, that's one of the things that I think is most valuable about sports. And I mentioned wrestling, and it is an individual sport, but it's also a team sport. It's the only sport where you can lose and still win because you didn't get pinned. You stay off your back. That is something that I think is an inherent value in all sports.
Yeah, I agree with you.
Of shared sacrifice and responsibility to others, and I'm part of something bigger than myself.
Yeah.
And I think we've lost a lot of that in our society for a variety of reasons. But sports, I think, still sort of reinforces those lessons to a large extent.
Phil Anastasia is with us. We're talking youth sports, not because we're, hoop heads or anything, although we are, but because it's important. And we're going to pick up on the conversation and get a little deeper in what happens with all this activity when you have to plan for it and get ready for perhaps, activities involved around safety from COVID-19. We're hanging on the Behavioral Corner.
At Retreat Behavioral Health, we believe in the power of connection and quality care. We offer comprehensive, holistic, and compassionate treatment from industry-leading experts. Call 855-802-6600 and begin your journey today.
Phil, let's pivot now and talk a little bit about COVID, because I know you have opinions. Now, you're certainly not a pediatrician or a CDC expert. None of us are here. But you've seen the guidances that have been issued for all these athletic programs. They're going ahead as though there's going to be fall sports in many locations around the country. This in spite of the fact we don't even know how we can open the schools effectively. But what's your general sense of the chances that they will actually have, for instance, football or basketball at the high school level in the near future?
I think it's 50-50 at this point. I think when it comes to high school sports, Steve, that has to go hand in hand with the reopening of the schools and getting that to work and seeing that works. If we are able to figure that out and come up with a model that works for opening the schools and keeping them open, then I think extracurricular activities can eventually be worked into that formula in some way, shape, or form. Probably not the way we're used to seeing them in the past, abbreviated schedules kind of thing, less travel, that kind of stuff. But I think if they can figure out the school conundrum, which, the entire country is kind of going crazy right now, trying to figure this out. I know a lot of people in education, I'm sure you do also, they're just pulling their hair out trying to figure this out, all for the right reasons.
Yep.
They want to do it. They know it's how important it is to the kids, to the teachers, to the parents. It's so complicated. There's so many moving parts. But if that is able to be, and it'll be a hit and miss kind of thing. I understand they're not going to create some, here's the model and it's on September 1st and it's going to work. They're going to have to do some adjustments. But if they can figure that out, then I think extracurricular activities, including sports, will then follow.
Oh.
So I'm hopeful, but I would not say I'm confident.
Yeah,
because sports adds, its own little complications to what we're already talking about is a very, very complicated.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I mean, if you think getting a math class safely put together is difficult, consider a football practice. The CDC has a whole list of guidelines, and I'm just going to throw a couple of these out at you that they've listed in terms of ranking them from the lowest risk to the highest risk. And one of the things parents can keep in mind now, what they should do, the CDC has at the lowest risk, that certainly performance building drills and conditionings that can be done either at home, alone, or among smaller groups is the lowest risk. That's a good idea. If you're a student athlete, you can be thinking about something like that right now, right?
Well, Steve, I think you should have been thinking of it all along, and I know most of them were. I mean, even when we were in the teeth of it in April, kids were going out and exercising, and they should have been, both from a physical standpoint and from a sort of a mental, emotional standpoint, just to kind of burn off some steam. So, yeah, I don't think there's any reason that, as a parent, you should have any misgivings about your kid going running around a track or doing some kind of aerobic activity to kind of build up stamina, any kind of running or something like that. It's when we get further down the line, when we're talking about close interaction or kind of bumping into each other or sweating on each other. Then
let's talk about team-based practices. I can conceive of a baseball team easily practicing. Or even a basketball team to a lesser extent, but I can't imagine football being coached, much less played, under these circumstances. Can you imagine that? How would it work?
Well, it's funny because I was speaking to a coach the other night on the phone, a guy named Timmy Gush, who's been at Shawnee High School for 40 years or whatever, and he told me, I have these guidelines now because they're starting workouts this week, just preliminary workouts, nothing major. And he said, everything I've learned for the last 40 years, I got to throw out the window because we have to do things so differently with pods, and there can only be 10 kids in a pod, and drills have to be run in a different way. I mean, it's certainly nothing like we've seen before in terms of each sport-specific drill or activity that is related to that particular sport. Every sport's a little bit different. Like you said, I think baseball, the nature of it, you have some social distancing there, the nature of it. Football, completely different. I'm hopeful, Steve, and I'm coming at this from the standpoint of someone who wants to see it happen and doesn't want to sound like an alarmist. And in all honesty, I mean, I have to express my own ignorance. I don't know. I don't know what the right number of kids on a field is. I don't know whether a kid in a helmet standing next to another kid in a helmet, are they putting each other at risk? I don't know the answer to that. All I can do is say, that there are experts who are going to put guidelines in place, and then it's the responsibility of the coaches to kind of implement that and maintain those protocols. For me to say, what would work or what wouldn't work, or this makes sense to me or doesn't make sense to me, frankly, I'd be speaking from a position of ignorance. No, I really don't know.
Parents take a tremendously active role in their kids' lives, in sports in particular. You mentioned the caricature of the overbearing parent. We're not talking about any of that now. Are you hearing from coaches, or are you hearing from parents who are saying, should I let my kids do this? What should I do?
There's no question that is sort of a factor in all this. I mean, I think it's a huge factor in the reopening of schools. And as you and I both know, one of the driving forces in education, a negative driving force in education for the last however many years, has been fear of litigation. I mean, that drives so many decisions in our society now. So I think one of the things you're going to see in terms of this comeback, and this is no great insight, I'm sure you've heard this before and we've read this before, is schools and teams trying to protect themselves from any kind of liability. So that goes to the parent sort of saying, you're putting my kid at risk kind of thing. I think there's going to be waivers that people are going to have to sign. There's going to be that kind of thing.
Wow. Think about that, having to sign
exactly.
a waiver for COVID-19.
Does that hold up in a court of law if your kid gets sick? God forbid your kids get seriously sick. Again, I'm speaking from a position of ignorance, but again, that's another complicating factor in all this. And parents, for good reason and for all the right reasons, are concerned about the safety of their kids. And I get that. And the absolute flip side of that, Steve, is parents are concerned about the mental health of their children.
Yep.
They need to get outside. They need to interact with other kids. They need sports or band or choir or whatever their extracurricular activity is. And so they're being damaged mentally if they don't have that. And that's a concern of parents. So it is just a wildly complicated, scenario that we're looking at here. Everybody wants to do the right thing. There's no question. Everybody's in it for the right reasons. But the guidance itself continues to change as our understanding of the virus changes. And a lot of people, I think, have been critical of some scientists and medical people because they've kind of changed their tune a little bit. But I think that's how science works. You learn
exactly.
more, you find out more, and you adjust your guidelines and your models.
Yeah, don't trust a scientist who won't change his mind. That's for sure. You know, we're proving right now that it's much easier to talk about these problems than to try to figure them out. But again, parents are confronted with this stuff. Kids have paid they for the most part they paid the same kind of price we've all paid with the separations and all that. But at a younger age and an age when it's really not the best thing that could possibly happen for them. So, you know, nobody wants to say it, but if it happens, it happens. I think you're right, though. If they can figure out the sports thing, they can probably use that as a model to get kids back in the classrooms, which we all desperately need. Here's the final thing, and then they're going to let you go. Even if they put it all together and it's safe to form the team and it's safe to, in fact, compete, you know, it's one thing for the pros to say we won't pay in front of crowds because they still have a television audience, which is where the money is anyway. I can't imagine Friday nights under the lights with just kids playing football. Can you?
No, and in fact, in New Jersey, and it's ongoing now, they're doing something called the Last Dance, which is a baseball tournament that they put together, basically involving high school teams. There was like 200 teams involved to try to give baseball teams a chance to kind of get together and play one last time, the kids that didn't play this past spring. So it's ongoing now, Steve. They've had first round kind of pool play last weekend. They're starting the second phase of it this week. Those games, Steve, were stuffed with spectators. Stuffed with spectators, just because the people were, number one, people were just dying to get out of the house, I guess. Number two, they were dying to finally see some new sports. You know, and number three, it was just, you know, it was an opportunity to see your kid or your kid that lives down the street or your nephew or your grandson. So, and one of the things, you know, to circle back where we started, one of the things I love about high school sports in particular is the fact that you go to a game on a Friday night, you know, there's a guy sitting there that played on the 72 team, and there's a guy the next row back that played on the 57 team, and you know, there's that history and tradition there, and you know, there's the kids that aren't on the team, but they're out supporting their classmates and their schoolmates, and they're wearing all the same colors, and there's a student section chanting at the other school student section, and I mean, that's part of the allure of it all, and you take that away, it's just a bunch of 16-year-olds playing out in the field. It's not the same.
It's not the same. And here's the quote I'll leave you with. I pulled this one out of nowhere. Let me see if I got it right. The Battle of Waterloo was won on the playing fields of Eton. This is big stuff. Kids need to play. I hope they get back. Phil Anastasia, the Philadelphia Inquirer. It's been great, Phil. Thanks.
My pleasure, Steve. Thank you.
That's it for now. And make us a habit, hanging out at the Behavioral Corner. And when we're not hanging, follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter on the Behavioral Corner.